Hello everybody, it's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for an Alice Oseman conversation. So yeah, this video is not quite how it was supposed to be. It's supposed to be a reading vlog. I actually started this vlog in May last year and I filmed a bunch of different clips as I went through and read all of Alice Oseman's body of work. Unfortunately, I managed to delete almost all of my footage. Yes, I'm very annoyed at myself for doing that. No, there is no way of getting the footage back. Unfortunately, it is gone. I deleted it off the cloud. I feel like an idiot, but that is what's happened. I have spoken to a few different people who have said that they would like to hear my thoughts about these books anyway, so instead we're going to be doing a bit of a discussion video. So sorry about that, but yeah, that's where we are. So I am standing in front of my Heartstopper collection because Heartstopper is the thing that started this entire experience. I have known about Heartstopper for a long time, basically since I started booktube, and I didn't read it until last year when the TV show came out. Not because I thought that it was bad or anything like that, just because I am not really much of a graphic novel, manga, comic book reader. It is something that I am developing a little bit of an interest in and starting to pick up a few more things, but until the last couple of years, it's just not something I've ever gravitated towards. I feel like I never really learnt the art of reading comics or graphic novels or manga. I still don't know about manga at all. And so I knew it was a graphic novel series, and so I just didn't want to, and so I just wasn't that interested. However, as I'm sure you're all aware, last year in April, the TV show based on the graphic novel series, based on the first two graphic novels, came out. It is 8 episodes long. It is absolutely fantastic. I fell completely in love with it. I don't actually know how many times I've watched it at this point because there's only 8 episodes and they're only about 25-30 minutes long. Very easy to binge, and it's just a really sweet, really thoughtful, really just amazing TV show. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Fantastic acting, amazing writing, just everything about it is fantastic and wonderful, and I highly recommend it. Can't praise it enough. It has become one of about 4 TV shows that I watch on repeat ad nauseum, put on when I'm feeling sick, when I'm feeling down, all of that sort of thing. So yeah, that hasn't been added to in quite a number of years, so that's saying a lot, I feel like. I did, of course, go ahead and read the graphic novels over on Webtoons where it first started, and I loved that as well. I thought it was fantastic. It's a very easy graphic novel to read, so if, like me, you feel like you're not really a graphic novel reader, you don't know how to read graphic novels, because that's something I find, I highly recommend this series as well. It's incredibly well done, quite simplistic, not in a negative way, just very straightforward, and I think really easy to read for that reason. So I have now read all of what is currently out. As you can see, I have now purchased all of them. I even have 2 copies of the first volume because they did the TV tie-in, which normally I don't like. Normally I go out of my way to not get the TV movie tie-in, but in this particular circumstance, they recreated the cover of the original with the TV, with the actors, which I thought was amazing and I loved it. But then my friend Michelle was accidentally sent 2 copies of the original, and she was like, well, I don't really need 2, so she gave me 1 because she knew that I would take a second copy because then they're a bit different slightly, maybe. Anyway, so yes, I have read all of these. I have not yet read volume 5. I don't think it's out yet, and I don't think it's up on Webtoons yet, so I haven't read that yet, but I will definitely read it when I get the opportunity. I saw a few different people doing these sorts of vlogs where they read Alice Oseman's books, and I thought, you know what, that seems like a lot of fun. I would really like to read some more of their stuff, see whether or not they are actually an amazing writer or whether it's, you know, fluke that I personally find Heartstopper so amazing. And yeah, that is where it started. That is what I did. I think that I'm actually going to go and sit down for the rest of this video because I've been filming a bit today already, so I'd like to sit for a little bit. So I'm going to reposition myself and you, which means we might not have these amazing books in the background quite like this, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. Okay, so they're still in frame. Anyway, so one thing to know about my experience of reading these books is that for the most part, I read them via audiobook. Now, if you know me, you will know that I don't really read audiobooks particularly often. I don't find it to be something that I really gravitate towards. Opposite to what most people say, I find that audiobooks take me longer because I don't necessarily want to listen to audiobooks every time I'm cooking or doing groceries or what have you. Sometimes I don't listen to anything, sometimes I like music, but yeah. So I find that with audiobooks, I have to make the time to consume an audiobook, as opposed to what a lot of other people say where they consume audiobooks partly because it allows them to have the time to read. But I decided that for a lot of these books I was going to listen to the audiobook because with Heartstopper being turned into a graphic novel, I just felt like they were potentially going to be the type of books that would lend themselves really, really well to something that wasn't just on paper, something that maybe was a little bit more three-dimensional. So that's what I decided to do, like I said, for the most part, with the books. So, things to know about Heartstopper before we get into the rest of the books. Heartstopper is basically a contemporary romance between two high school boys, Nick and Charlie. We touch on a number of different topics to do with coming out, to do with finding yourself, to do with being a teenager and figuring out who you are, what you want. There is a trans character, a trans girl. There are characters of different ethnicities, and so Alice Oseman has managed to touch on a number of different things that are quite important to discuss. So we have these two characters. We have Nick Nelson, who is in year 11, I'm pretty sure, when the graphic novels and this show start, and he is a rugby player. He's kind of one of the lads, but he's actually an absolute sweetheart at heart. And then we have Charlie Spring, who is a very shy but actually very popular and well-liked kind of nerdy boy in grade 10. He's the only boy at their boys' school where they go who is out as being gay, and the two form a friendship, and then through various different things that happen as a part of their friendship and getting to know each other, they form a romantic attachment and end up eventually in a relationship. And yeah, like I said, it's absolutely gorgeous. I loved it. So I say all this because I think, upon reflection, I think when I started out the vlog, I was still very much in the world of Heartstopper. I was still very attached to these characters, very attached to their story, to the world. Most of Alice Oseman's books are tangentially in the same world as Nick and Charlie, which is what I knew. And so, yeah, I don't think that I necessarily, although I said and I fully intended that I was reading Alice Oseman's books, I think to a certain degree I was reading books expecting there to be more of these characters that I had fallen so in love with. Anyway, so I started with Solitaire, which is, I believe, Alice Oseman's first book, and it is actually Charlie's elder sister's book. So it is about Tori Spring. Yeah, so it's about her and her life, essentially. There is a little bit of mystery going on. There's something unusual happening at the school. There are sort of online threats and different things like that. So that forms part of the plot, but essentially it's just about Tori and some experiences that she's having and finding herself and yeah, stuff like that. It does feature Nick and Charlie quite heavily because Tori is Charlie's older sister and Charlie himself is going through a lot, and Tori is very protective of Charlie and a very good friend of Charlie's, very close to Charlie. So we do have a lot of Nick and Charlie. Now, this was the first book that was written. I believe that Alice themselves and also other people fell in love with Nick and Charlie, and that's where Heartstopper came from. But I came from the other end, having read and watched Heartstopper and then going back to Solitaire. So I wasn't sure what to expect because Alice Oseman, I believe, was 16 or 17 when they wrote Solitaire. So not that, you know, a 16 or 17-year-old can't be incredibly talented, but first book, very young, wasn't quite sure what I was going to get out of it, but I really, really enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it partly because I just really like those characters. I really like Tori as a character as well, and I really enjoyed being in her head and experiencing things from her point of view. It takes place, I think, around the same time as Volume 4, end of Volume 3, most of Volume 4. So yeah, I read that, so I knew what was going on, and it was interesting to get Tori's perspective on all of that, but also just her own life. I was incredibly impressed knowing how young Alice Oseman was when they wrote the book. I was incredibly impressed by how they were able to write these quite complex topics. I just felt like it was very authentic, incredibly well written, and I really believed the characters. None of the things are things I've personally experienced, but it definitely felt believable. The characters felt very real, very three-dimensional. I think Alice Oseman is an amazing writer. They really do seem to understand people's humanness. So that was something I really, really enjoyed about Solitaire. I really enjoyed the process of listening to it, and like I said before, I'm not much of a audiobook person, but I just found that the books really do, well, the ones I've read anyway, by audio, really lend themselves to that type of medium. Not to say that they wouldn't lend themselves really well to physically. I did read a couple of books physically, and that was still a really fun experience, but they do lend, because they're so informal and conversational, they lend themselves really well to audiobooks, which I really enjoyed. It definitely made me appreciate audiobooks more as well, so that was fun also. But yeah, so I really enjoyed Solitaire. Like I said, I did really enjoy the part where I was exploring more of Nick and Charlie. I mean, I was exploring a story that I'd heard before or come across before, but it was nice to see different perspective of Nick and Charlie, but still have Nick and Charlie. The next thing I read was Nick and Charlie. So that is a novella that is about Nick and Charlie. I believe that it is set when Nick is about to go off. It's been a while, been almost a year, so excuse me if I'm not 100%, but I believe it's when Nick is about to head off to university. Charlie is in his last year of school, and they're very, very much together, and they want to stay together, but then Charlie starts to kind of freak out about whether or not that will really ultimately work. And yeah, it's about that transition between high school and university, between teenage and adult, and finding your place in all of that, how you fit into each other's lives when your lives are changing so much, and what that might look like. As I said, it's a novella, it's very short, but I really, really enjoyed it. It was very fun to be back in Charlie and Nick's heads rather than seeing them through Tori's eyes, but it was still very fun to be back in their heads. I don't have a huge amount to say about this book in particular. It was very much a kind of slice of life, a few months worth of the book, and it was quite a while ago. Unfortunately, like I said, I've lost the footage, so you would have seen a bit more from me there, but I did have a lot of fun. It was a really nice palette cleanser. I read it in an afternoon because, as I said, it's short. I think it's 150 pages long or something like that. So I read it in an afternoon, and it's incredibly readable. They're all very readable, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I continued to think Alice Oseman was a great writer, and so I appreciated this little slice of life of Charlie and Nick. Alright, then we come to radio silence. Now, there are a number of different people over the years since I started watching booktube and became aware of Alice Oseman as an author who have talked about radio silence as being their favourite book of all time, one of the best books in the world, one of their favourite books of that year, their favourite Alice Oseman book. So I was expecting a lot from the book. But the other thing is, and this is the part where I think it's quite unfortunate, that I was still I do still absolutely love Heartstopper, don't get me wrong, but I don't think I'm quite in the same kind of absolutely in love with, can't stop watching. I mean, I haven't watched it for quite a while. So yeah, I mean, yeah. Anyway, The other thing that I knew about Radio Silence, or had been told about Radio Silence, was that it is Alad's book. So he does not appear in the TV show. They've changed things about the TV show, and he's a character who is not in the TV show. He is, however, in the books. He is a friend of Charlie's in the graphic novels, and so I thought that this was Alad's book, which meant that I was expecting more of Nick and Charlie. I was expecting it to be more like Solitaire, in that it was tangentially about Nick and Charlie. So it was about someone else, and it was about their life, so it wouldn't be completely Nick and Charlie, but that, you know, they would have that closeness, so we would see Nick and Charlie a lot. That wasn't actually the case. It is Alad's book, but Alad is not the main character. It is a girl named Frances, and it is not at all about True High School, about Nick and Charlie. It's about Alad, but from someone else's perspective about Alad, and so I think Nick and Charlie were maybe mentioned like twice in the entire book. So yeah, I did like Radio Silence. I thought it was really interesting and, again, really well written, but I didn't love it as much as I was anticipating, and I do think a lot of that is just my own expectation and not, I mean, all of it is my own expectation and not the book. I do want to reread the book because I think I would get a lot more out of it if I reread the book. I did listen to this one on audio again, and as I've said, as I keep saying, it's not my preferred way to read a book. Although I enjoyed it, I thought that the people that did the audio book did a great job. But yeah, I did enjoy listening to it. I thought that was really well done, and I definitely think it lends itself, again, to listening to. I think that maybe I should read it physically. It doesn't have to be an actual physical book. Ebooks are fine, but I think I should read it in my preferred way, through my eyeballs, just because that's my preferred way of reading, and I think that I would get more out of it. And now that I know what it's not, I think I'd get more out of it that way as well. There were lots of different things in the book that really intrigued me. It's a little bit more of a complicated plot, this one, but so we follow Frances from her perspective, and Frances is, by day, her public persona is that she is an incredibly bright, I mean, she is incredibly bright, but her public persona is she's incredibly bright, driven school captain. She lives in the same area as Truman Higgs, but she goes to a different school again. But anyway, she's the school captain. She's working towards getting into a really prestigious university, and she's really good at school, and school's really important to her. She's a big studier, straight A student, etc. That's her public persona. That's how she puts herself out into the world and how she identifies. However, she also has a private persona, and that is that she is an artist, and she creates fan art for this YouTube podcast, I think is how it's written. I don't know what that means, but I'm assuming it's just a podcast that was available on YouTube. I'm not really sure. But anyway, it's a podcast. It's not a video. This podcast that is her favourite podcast, that is a sci-fi podcast called Universe City, and Radio Silence is the name of the main character. So she has this Tumblr account, and she puts up these drawings, this artwork that she creates as fan art for this podcast. The podcast is very, very popular among all the students at her school, among many people that she knows. Anyway, she's secretly got this other persona. It's a public persona as well because it's on Tumblr. It's quite famous. People know, but no one knows who she is. Also, no one knows who the creator and producer of Universe City is either. So they're both not known. Anyway, one day she gets a message from Universe City asking her to create some artwork for the podcast. She contacts them back and is like, oh my god, I can't believe you've contacted me, and so on and so forth. It turns out that Alad is the creator of Universe City, and it turns out that she and Alad kind of know each other. She knew Alad's twin sister. Anyway, so there's the plot line of Universe City kind of threading through the narrative, but then there's also the plot line of Francis and Alad's best friend, partner, Daniel. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say about the storyline, but it's, like I said, a bit more in depth because there's a few different plot lines, a few different focuses happening. As I said, I still thought this was incredibly well written, and talking about it again, I actually feel like, yeah, I do definitely want to go and read this because I think I really would enjoy it a lot more. But like I said before, there is almost no Nick and Charlie, which is fine. There doesn't have to be, but I was expecting there to be, and given that I was still completely in the, you know, I'm watching Heartstopper probably once a week phase, I just was disappointed that I didn't have the boys in there, and it just wasn't what I was expecting. It just wasn't what I was expecting at all. But I do think it was incredibly well written. The point of the story wasn't so much the whole university sci-fi storyline, although there were moments where that was in there, the actual kind of story of that was in there, and I thought that was really well done. I don't think Alice Oseman is necessarily a sci-fi author. What they've written so far, and published so far anyway, has been young adult contemporary, but I do think that did they decide to attempt to write sci-fi, that they'd probably do a pretty good job because all the stuff that was in there was quite interesting. But yeah, it's mostly another kind of young adult contemporary about people and humanity and how we treat each other and how we live together and how we figure ourselves out and who we are and what we want and what it means to be a human and be a girl and be etc. So that was really, really interesting. Ella discovers that he is asexual throughout the book, and a bunch of different things happen as a result of that. But yeah, that was Radio Silence, so I definitely need to reread Radio Silence at some point. I don't know when exactly because I do have a lot on my plate reading wise, but yeah, it's something I'd like to do, so there's that. Hello. It is a different day, as you can probably tell. It's actually a couple of weeks later and the weather has gotten quite a bit cooler, so hence the cooler outfit, but anyway, not important. This was supposed to be a vlog anyway, so it would have been like that anyway, but of course we are where we are. So anyway, I wanted to have a little bit of a break because on the particular day that you would have just seen, which was 2 weeks ago for me, I filmed, I think, 3 other videos, so I'd been talking a lot and I needed a bit of a break. Didn't really intend for it to be this much of a break, but there you go. Anyway, so where am I up to? This Winter, which is another book that is about Nick and Charlie, and it actually, I think it's set at Christmas time, probably again in volume 4 of Heartstopper. Charlie's just come home from the clinic where he was staying. Now all of his family are gathered for Christmas, and it's about him basically just not coping with that. Yeah, he is really confronted by a bunch of different things that his family do, and he ends up freaking out and running away to Nick's house. Then Tori gets really upset because Charlie ran away without talking to her and ran off to Nick's house, and yeah, it's basically just a little look at their lives over a few hours at Christmas when, you know, relationships can be tricky in family, and Christmas time is often quite a emotionally fraught time because you have all your family together, different generations, different beliefs, etc., and it can be a bit confronting. And that is where Charlie was. He found that really hard. He'd just come back from hospital. A lot of people didn't understand, including his mum. And yeah, he was just having a really hard time. Plus there's all the food, and of course Charlie has an eating disorder. So very difficult. It was lovely. It was great. I cannot remember what star rating I gave it, but I did enjoy it. Like I said, it's just a short little novella about Nick and Charlie and about this particular time and a bit more about Charlie's mental health and trying to deal with that. For me, it fleshed out more of Heartstopper. I'd be interested to see if anything from that is included in the TV show, but it wasn't really. I enjoyed it because it's Nick and Charlie, but it wasn't like it wasn't a separate thing to my way of thinking from Heartstopper, even though obviously it was, if that makes sense. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, and I'm going to move straight into Loveless. So Loveless is totally different. from Nick and Charlie universe, but I knew that Loveless was not about Nick and Charlie. I knew that it was about different characters and different story. So unlike with Radio Silence, I wasn't expecting to follow Nick and Charlie or anyone else from Heartstopper, so I was totally fine with not following any of them. And I really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoy, as I've said before, Alice Oseman's writing style. I think they have a really fantastic way of writing teenagers and writing that period of time in your life when you are trying to figure out who you are and what you want and what your life is and what you want it to be and who your friends are and how to be an adult and how to function on your own and find yourself and find where you fit and what's important to you, what your politics are, etc. Included in that, is your sexuality. So this particular book is about Georgia and her two best friends from high school go to university. They move away from home to go to university. Pip and Jason, the two best friends, are in a different college to what Georgia is. And then Georgia is given a roommate called Rooney, and it's about all of their friendships and can you maintain friendships once you move away from home? Can you maintain your high school friendships? Who are we or are we not attracted to? Georgia is someone who grew up watching a lot of rom-coms, reading a lot of rom-coms, and just loving romantic movies, romantic concepts, and really, really wants her romantic moment. However, as she gets involved in different societies at university, including the Pride Society, she starts to realise that maybe she just doesn't feel that way. Starts to discover actually maybe she's asexual, maybe she's aromantic, maybe she isn't looking for romance, and trying to figure out what that means for her, how that fits into LGBTQIA+, how that fits in to the world, and yeah, what that will mean for her future, what she wants it to mean, all of that sort of thing. So it is a growing up story, it's a coming of age story, but it's also an exploration of asexuality that is not something that's understood even amongst LGBTQIA+ culture. And that's something that is talked about in the book. The president of Pride Soc is also ace, and he talks about how even the people that run Pride Soc don't think that it's a real thing, and don't think that it's LGBTQIA+, and it's about how do you figure out yourself and what your sexuality is when you don't fit anywhere and being able to carve out a place for yourself and figure out what that means even when it's not something that anyone really understands or accepts, or few people do. But yeah, as ever, as I've said all the way along, really enjoyed this one. Thought it was fantastic, thought it was a really interesting look at that age-old coming of age, but obviously with a twist because it's something a bit different that is often not talked about and often not acknowledged. And so it was really good to have a book that young people could read and could help them to figure out a bit more about themselves. For me, as a cis woman, I found it really, really helpful from the point of view of I'm a teacher, and I think it's really good to know what students are experiencing and what they are finding out about themselves, but also just, as a human existing in the world, it was really good to read about something that isn't something I really know anything about. And yeah, I thought that was really fantastic. I think I gave it 4.5 stars, so definitely really enjoyed this one. And then the final of Alice Oseman's books that I have read in this experience was I Was Born for This. So this, I think, was the second book that Alice Oseman wrote. I think they wrote it when they were 19, 20 or something like that. I could be wrong, of course. And this follows two different characters. I can't remember their names, but one character is a fan of this boy band and the other character is in the boy band. It's essentially about 5 days of their lives, and the fan has gone to London to stay with a friend, and the friend is an online friend who they bonded over their shared love for this band, and they have got tickets to go to this special meet with the band and go to a concert, and so they're staying together at the friend's grandmother's house, and they finally get to meet, and then the other friend, it's hard when you can't remember names, but the other friend has also invited someone, and it's a boy that she's interested in, but again, it's an online thing. There's a lot of jealousy going on there. They kind of have a bit of a falling out. But at the same time, this other character who is in the boy band is really struggling with his mental health. He has anxiety and gets panic attacks, and it's quite severe and can be quite debilitating. Among the many things that causes him anxiety is the fact that they are very, very famous, and their fame really can be quite difficult for them. It makes it hard for them to live kind of normal lives, going down to the supermarket or, just going to the petrol station to get a jug of milk or whatever. They get recognised, they get followed, they get mobbed by very young teens, and so they've had to really change the way that they live. Their freedom is quite curtailed in a lot of ways, even though they are still living this really rarefied life where they are really fancy hotels and they are being, they're on stage and they're having these tours and getting all this stuff. Their freedom is quite curtailed in a lot of ways. Band is these three boys. They're quite young themselves. They're in their kind of late teens, I think. So it's been quite a rise to this fame and quite a bit of a strange learning curve. And it's these two best friends and then another friend that they made throughout high school. And the two best friends, there's quite a lot of rumour about whether they are in a relationship themselves. One of the friends has a girlfriend, but that's very on the down low and no one's figured that out yet. And then there was a lot of media attention probably a year before the book opens because the other character, the main boy band character that we follow, is a trans boy, and so that was obviously very big in the news, and you can imagine all the sorts of different responses people got, and obviously his anxiety is not helped by being so much in the limelight, being so much part of the media, like being followed by paparazzi and all of that. And then somehow this other girl character ends up in a position where she ends up kind of helping out the boy band member, and all sorts of kind of fairly off the wall shenanigans happens, but it's about him trying to kind of figure out what he wants and manage his anxiety and their relationships within the band and all the different relationships and figuring out how to manage all those things and how to grow up. Basically, it's another coming of age story. So there was a lot going on in this book, but I enjoyed it. I definitely think it's well written. I definitely still think Alice Oseman is an amazing author. They still managed to do all the characterization that they do with that I've really enjoyed in all their other books really, really well. But I just didn't love this one as much. Yeah, it got 3.5 stars. It's still definitely enjoyable, but I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the fact that they were switching between characters, although usually that's something I quite enjoy or at least don't mind. Yeah, so I'm not really sure, but it just wasn't my favourite, but I still did enjoy it. But yeah, I've had a really, really great time with this experience reading all of these books. Like I said at the beginning, I had heard about Alice Oseman as an author. In particular, Heartstopper and Radio Silence and Loveless were the ones that I'd heard kind of the most about, and how fantastic they were and how meaningful they were for a lot of people, but I hadn't really ever felt particularly compelled to read any of the books. But obviously, as you know, the TV show Heartstopper came out, and then of course I read the comics, and then that's where the idea came from. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed the experience. I think Alice Oseman is an amazing character writer, and just really is able to talk about the experience of young adults really, really well. I think they do an amazing job of writing that story. And even though I feel like basically all of the books that I've read from them, all of their books are about that. They're all slightly different. They're all done in a slightly different way. All of the books have LGBTQIA+ rep, And I find that really, really amazing, and I think that's really important for young people to have all these books that they can turn to, that they can read to find out about people that might not be the same as them, but also if they are going through those experiences, finding out about other people that have gone through those experiences. I mean, obviously them being fiction, but still I get a lot of my learning from fiction. So yeah, I think that's really, really important, and I'm glad to have read it. I definitely will be recommending these books to teenagers that I don't teach teenagers, but definitely books that I'll be recommending to teenagers when I do that. I would highly recommend for teenagers, if you have teenagers, if you are a teenager who happens to have come across this video, definitely recommend Alice Oseman's books. I think they're just great for, I mean, in general, I think they're great, but I think they're just great for that time of life. But yeah, if you are looking for just a really fun book, I would recommend any of these books. Obviously, my heart belongs to Heartstopper, but I do just think they're all fantastic, really well written, just really heartrending and really important, and there's a lot going on, but also just really fun. I did find these books really educational as well. There are so many things about coming out, about living in the society that we live in, that is getting better about recognizing queer people as, you know, being perfectly normal and okay, but still there's a long way to go. I found these books really, really educational because they talk about the experiences of people going through those things, and so it feel like I can understand it because I can understand how people go through different life experiences. It's, you know, it feels like when you, like anything, when you're reading something that you can relate to a certain extent. Like I can relate to being a human and trying to find myself and growing up. So now I can a little bit more understand what it is to also be trying to figure out your sexuality, which is not something that I feel like I ever had to do because I am straight and the world is geared around straight people. So, like, my experience has been something that's been in media, that's been portrayed, that's been talked about, that's been understood, and so I didn't have any reason why I had to kind of figure out how to manage that, because I could turn to other places. I could talk to people because it was acceptable and okay. And we're getting better there, I think, but there's a long way to go. But the fact that books, like books written by Alice Oseman, are published and are very popular and put out there, the fact that Heartstopper got made into a TV show, all of these things are definitely positive and I think going in the right direction, and also just really great from a point of view of learning about something that is not my experience. It's been really fantastic. So yeah, really happy to have done this. Really, really, really glad that I discovered that I did in fact like Alice Oseman. Really excited to read anything else they put out. Very excited for the next season of Heartstopper and the next couple of volumes of the graphic novel. But yeah, that is my thoughts on reading Alice Oseman's books. Have you read all of these books yourself? What do you think of them? Comment all of that down below. Do you have any recommendations of where I could go next? I am definitely trying to broaden my horizons and read more LGBTQIA+ books, but do you have anything that you would recommend? Please comment that below as well. That'd be amazing. If you'd like to leave me a comment but you don't know what, then leave me your favourite emoji, because I don't know, I just feel like that's the right emoji. All of my social media details are listed in the description below, so if you'd like to go and follow me on any of those other platforms, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.